A trembling whisper of humanity drifts through the cavernous sanctum, swallowed by the grinding liturgy of sacred machinery. Breath merges with metal, and thought dissolves into obedient rhythm. I exist here in the half, light between memory and construction, suspended within a machine that listens to every heartbeat, every hesitation, every flicker of self. Thoughts echo like insects trapped beneath iron hymns, small rebellions buzzing quietly against the weight of inevitability. The hum of the machine is constant, both captor and companion, a ceaseless pulse threading through marrow and mind, binding me to a world where flesh is fragile and obedience is sanctified. Its vibrations resonate in the hollow spaces of the cathedral, like expanse, steel arches rising endlessly, lit by flickering amber votives and lumen strips pulsing like dying nerves. Servo skulls drift like ghosts, cogitators drip with sacred oils, and every surface gleams with cold precision. Shadows crawl with hidden suffering, and light fractures through incense smoke, revealing glimpses of the human that once was. Here, philosophy is not spoken, it is engraved into bone, wired into consciousness. Memory is no longer an inheritance. It is a gift granted by those who control the machinery of life itself. Identity trembles at the edge of erasure, and yet, somewhere deep inside, a heartbeat insists on remembering its rhythm. This is the threshold, a journey through flesh and steel, through obedience and awakening, toward a question that no machine can answer: what remains human when all that is known has been rewritten? And so, it begins. The first thing I remember is not light, but a pulse, a slow, reverberating thrum moving through the dark like a creature breathing behind walls of metal. It seeped into me before thought returned, before language reassembled itself inside the hollowed chambers of my mind. I drifted in that conditionless black, suspended somewhere between a dream and a dismantling, listening to the hum that felt both alien and intimately familiar. It wrapped around me like a cradle built of iron ribs, carrying me upward into a world I did not recall entering. When sight returned, it did so reluctantly, like an old lens grinding open. Pale shapes drifted through haze, their edges wavering, their colors washed thin by a sterile glow above me. I felt weight before I felt my body a pressure sinking into the table beneath my spine, a tension running through cables I could not see, but could sense threading deep into muscle and memory. My breath shuddered out, not entirely my own, regulated by something quiet and cold moving in sync with my lungs. The air tasted metallic, recycled, dead. I tried to recall who I was, but the answer slipped through me like oil. Only fragments rose, the suggestion of a face reflected in water, an echo of laughter swallowed by wind, the warmth of a hand in mine. Each flicker snapped away as if yanked back by invisible clamps. What remained was a hollow ache, a soft grief without a name. A shadow drifted over me, and I felt the prickle of mechadendrites lowering like curious limbs. Their cold tips grazed the surface of my skin, if it was still skin, tracing the curve of my jaw, the ridge of my temple, the stillness of my throat. Every touch sent ripples through my nervous system, mapping pathways I didn't consent to open. I sensed them adjusting me, aligning something beneath my flesh, whispering logic where instinct once lived. My pulse stuttered, the hum deepened, resonating inside my ribs. Someone or something spoke above me, but the words were not words. They were streams of binaric code, chirps and static pulses that threaded into my ears like sharpened needles. My mind tried to translate, failed, tried again, then surrendered. The language felt older than thought, as if carved into the architecture of reality itself. I inhaled sharply as a memory flickered, a child running barefoot through dust, sun burning gold across their face, my face, maybe. The moment cracked apart as a surge of static erased it, leaving only the faint warmth of light I could no longer picture. More shapes appeared, silhouettes wrapped in long robes the color of rusted blood. Their movements were slow, deliberate, ritualistic. Tools gleamed in their hands, not surgical, but ceremonial, as if the act of altering me was less procedure and more sacred liturgy. I felt their presence like a gravity, heavy and absolute. They regarded me not as a person awakening, but as a mechanism being activated. I tried to speak. My voice came out as a rasp, a glitch. Something tightened around my throat, redirecting the attempt into silence. A faint panic fluttered in my chest, weak and uncoordinated, like a bird trapped behind steel ribs. I didn't know if it was mine, or a remnant of the person I had been. The priests didn't notice, or perhaps they noticed perfectly and simply didn't care. Their chants poured over me, saturating the chamber in a rhythm that matched the pulse inside the walls. The hum, always the hum, it crawled through my bones like a second heartbeat, deeper than the first, more certain, more permanent. As vision stabilized, the world unfolded around me in vast cathedral, like dimensions, towering columns of machinery stretching into shadowed heights, gears turning in slow mechanical prayer, lines of circuitry glowing like veins filled with molten copper. The air shimmered with incense smoke, carrying the scent of sacred oils and burnt offerings. Every sound seemed amplified, the click of distant servitors, the scrape of metal claws across stone, the deep resonant moan of reactors buried far below. It was beautiful in a way that felt cruel, a world crafted with reverence yet devoid of mercy. Something shifted inside my head, a soft click, a subtle recalibration, and suddenly the faces of the robed figures sharpened into focus. Their eyes were hidden behind lenses and glowing implants, their mouths covered by vox skrills. Their humanity was reduced to silhouettes wrapped in machine devotion. One leaned closer, a mechadendrite extended, brushing the side of my head. A jolt shot through me, not pain, not exactly, more like recognition. For a moment, I saw a flicker of another memory, a woman kneeling beside me, whispering something gentle, something meant to comfort. Her features were blurred beyond clarity, but the tone lingered, warm and fragile. It felt like a promise or a goodbye. The memory collapsed as another pulse of machine. Code filled my skull. I gasped. Or the machine gasped for me. My hands, or what remained of them, twitched at my sides, joints stiff, foreign, fingers responding a fraction too late, as if they awaited permission before obeying. I didn't know if the delay was mechanical or psychological. The Mechanicus priests observed my movements like engineers assessing a newly installed component. One of them adjusted a lumen panel above me, flooding the sanctum with pale light that washed away all color. In the glare, I glimpsed the outline of my forearm. It was mine, but wrong, too smooth, too precise. The texture subtly segmented where skin met metallic reinforcement. A fine seam glinted under the light. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't remember this. I didn't choose this. The hum responded to my distress, intensifying, vibrating through the table and into my spine. It felt like a voice murmuring behind the frequencies, telling me to submit, to let go, to drift back into the quiet obedience it expected of me. But something in me refused, a small, stubborn spark, faint, shaking, but alive. The priests continued their rituals, adjusting circuits, muttering chants, calibrating my body like a relic being restored. I felt their hands pressing against metal and flesh, merging both until I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. One of them whispered a string of binary into the inlet by my ear. The sound burrowed deep, altering something fundamental. I felt a memory slip, not gently, but like a page ripped from a book. A name, my name, dissolved before I could say it. I reached for it. I reached for myself, but my hand trembled, disobedient, the movement intercepted by conflicting commands. Somewhere behind the whiteness of the lights, the machines exhaled like ancient beasts, waking from slumber. Their hum wrapped around my heartbeat, merging the two into a single rhythm. They wanted me to forget, to yield, to become one of the countless voices swallowed by the great mechanical chorus. But in the fragile spaces between those pulses, I heard something else, a distant echo, a heartbeat trying to remember its rhythm, mine, and I held on to it even as everything else was taken. I kept walking through the hollow corridors of memory, each one echoing with the same metallic whisper that had followed me since the first moment I opened my eyes in this failing world. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, more like a pulse of awareness that brushed the edges of my thoughts whenever I tried to understand who I used to be. Every step felt heavier, as if my past was a shadow stitched to my feet, refusing to let me rise above it. There were moments when I could almost sense a version of myself standing just behind me, breathing the same air, watching through the veil of my uncertainty, a fractured reflection, a buried shape, something caught between silence and understanding. I tried to speak to it, but my words felt like dust collapsing before they formed, and still, the pressure inside my mind kept building, like a door trying to open from the inside. I told myself I wasn't afraid, but fear was a thread woven into the very structure of my thoughts. It appeared in the smallest pauses between my heartbeats, in the quiet tremors that ran through my hands when I questioned what I truly remembered and what was merely debris drifting from an erased timeline. There were pieces missing, deliberately carved out, leaving behind raw edges that throbbed whenever I tried to look too deeply. Sometimes I felt as if the world itself knew more about me than I did. The abandoned structures around me seemed to hum with a recognition I couldn't place. Their derelict frames leaned inward, as though trying to whisper truths they no longer possessed the language to convey. I traced my fingers along their surfaces, hoping for clarity, but all I found was a coldness that clung to my skin like a warning. And yet, beneath that coldness, something stirred. It was faint at first, a small current threading through the quiet, an almost imperceptible sense that somewhere, beyond the fog of my incomplete identity, a greater design was unfolding. Not fate, not destiny, but a convergence, a point where everything I feared, everything I doubted, everything I'd forgotten, would collide with the truth waiting for me in the dark. There was a weight inside me, an unspoken certainty that my existence was not an accident. Every fragmented memory, every glitch in my thoughts, every moment where the world felt slightly misaligned, they were signals, breadcrumbs left for me to follow, but who left them, and why was I the one sent to follow them? I exhaled slowly, letting the breath steady me, even though it carried no comfort. I had no choice but to move forward. The past might have abandoned me, but the future hadn't made its decision yet. And somewhere between those two uncertain horizons, I would carve out the truth. Even if I had to tear open the fabric of my own mind to reach it, I tightened my hands, feeling a faint tremor glide through my fingertips. It was not fear anymore, it was anticipation, a quiet rebellion forming in the depths of my fractured identity. There was no turning back, not now, not ever. The world had become colder than I remembered. Not temperature, but absence of color, warmth, and familiarity. I awoke suspended in silence, the floor beneath me a lattice of cold metal and wires, and the air carrying a faint tang of ozone and oil. Every breath was measured, filtered, reduced to efficiency. The pulse of the machine had changed. It no longer hummed in rhythm with me, it dominated me. I was its echo, its reflection, a shadow of the self I had barely begun to remember. I tried to move and discovered my body was not my own. Joints no longer responded instinctively. Fingers twitched only when prompted by the rigid commands embedded deep in my mind. A series of clamps and harnesses held me in place, pressing my chest and limbs in exacting angles. The restraints were clinical, unyielding, and precise. Resistance was irrelevant, submission was mandatory, and yet the part of me that remembered warmth, softness, and laughter flared briefly in defiance before being drowned under the hum of sanctioned control. Above me, servo arms hovered. They glimmered under harsh red and black lighting, their tips poised with instruments I could not name, yet somehow knew were capable of rewriting what it meant to be me. A dull, procedural voice reverberated somewhere beyond the immediate chamber, chanting sequences I could barely decipher. Each syllable felt like a scalpel, cutting away fragments of memory, sculpting me into compliance. My name, the one I had clung to in fleeting, fragile thought. had already been removed from the registers, replaced by a series of digits whispered into my skull, meaningless and unyielding. Time became a blur of methodical alterations. Bone shavings drifted down like falling ash. Neural pathways were rerouted with surgical precision. Lungs replaced and adjusted for efficiency rather than survival. My old self recoiled from the intrusion, but even the instinct to scream had been intercepted, filtered through algorithms and mechanical gates. I was aware, horribly aware, yet powerless. The voice of my body, my own protest, had been muted by the design of another. I glimpsed myself in a polished chrome panel. The reflection was not human. Limbs were unnaturally aligned, joints reinforced, skin taut over newly grafted segments of metal. My face stared back, familiar yet impossible, a mask formed from fragments of flesh and machine. I touched it, and the contact sparked a shock of recognition and loss. There was nothing left of the person I had been, only the vessel being shaped for obedience. The priests moved around me, chanting to the Omnissiah, their gestures methodical, their devotion absolute. Each motion seemed to carve compliance deeper into my flesh, reinforcing a hierarchy I could not resist. The machine's hum had grown into a thunderous presence, drowning out the faint pulse of what had once been my own heartbeat. And in that oppressive stillness, I realized something terrifying. I was no longer the author of my own existence. I was a relic in the process of being perfected. The final restraints loosened with a quiet hiss, but the release did not feel like freedom. It felt like calibration. My limbs dropped into alignment with mechanical precision, each movement guided more by programmed instinct than by will. I stood slowly, not because I chose to, but because something inside me interpreted standing as the correct response to a command I could no longer hear. My body had become a system of responses, silent, obedient, predictable. Breathing felt different now. Each inhale was regulated, filtered, and measured to maintain efficiency. Even the rise and fall of my chest seemed rehearsed, like a motion learned rather than lived. I lifted a hand toward my face, curious, hesitant. Yet the motion completed itself before the thought fully formed. My fingers hovered against my cheek, feeling warmth layered over cold, flesh stretched over quiet machinery. I tried to feel human again through that touch, but the sensation slipped through me like fog. A memory tried to surface, something small, something soft, a hand that once held mine in the dark. But the moment it began to take shape, it crumbled. The machine inside me rejected it. My mind pulsed with a faint sting, a reminder that recollection was no longer a possibility unless permitted. And nothing was permitted. I took a step forward, the floor vibrating gently beneath me. My legs responded flawlessly, too flawlessly, as if anticipating the ground before my foot met it. I realized then that instinct and autonomy had been peeled away layer by layer, replaced with a silent network of impulses I had no control over. I tried resisting, just a single step in the opposite direction, but the command evaporated inside me before reaching my muscles. It wasn't my body that refused, it was the programming that lived where my will used to be. I felt pressure bloom inside my mind, a presence that wasn't quite a voice. It whispered without sound, a quiet alignment of thought that guided me like an invisible hand on the spine. Not words, tendencies, not orders, inclinations. My mind slipped into its rhythm with disturbing ease. The machine didn't need to speak to me, it only needed to shape the path my thoughts would naturally follow. I moved again, following the pull of that silent guidance. Each step felt like walking deeper into a life that had already been chosen for me. My shadow stretched long across the metallic floor, distorted by the glow of shifting lights overhead. It flickered in strange ways, as if trying to tell me it no longer belonged to me. For a moment, I wondered if there was anything left inside me that could still rebel. Any sparks of the person I had been before they carved me into this obedient form. I searched for anger, for fear, for grief, anything, but found only faint remnants buried beneath layers of restructuring. Emotions didn't vanish, they were simply muted, reduced to faint echoes that barely reached me. And yet, even muted, something survived, a quiet awareness, a thin thread of self, a whisper that refused to dissolve. It was small, fragile, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a sliver of identity wedged between the gears of the machine. It didn't fight, it didn't scream, it simply watched, waiting for something I could not yet understand. I took one final step, and the machine inside me settled into perfect alignment, but the quiet watcher within me did not. There was a moment, just a moment, when I believed the transformation had ended, that the cold silence inside me had reached its conclusion, leaving nothing left to alter or overwrite. But as I moved through the shifting corridors of the structure, I realized the process hadn't stopped at all. It had simply changed shape. The machinery no longer worked on my body, now it worked on my perception. The walls rippled with data, streams of code pulsing like veins just beneath metallic skin. Every flicker, every shift in the patterns felt familiar, as if my mind had been tuned to recognize meanings hidden within the flux. I didn't remember learning this language, yet it moved through me with the comfort of something long embedded in my subconscious. Instinct told me it was information, the faint whisper inside me, the one piece of self that still survived, told me it was conditioning. With each step, fragments of knowledge slid into place, not memories, but instructions masquerading as understanding. I could feel the structure's heartbeat, sense the direction of energy flow, even predict where the next shift in pressure would occur. My mind calculated these details with a precision that no human intuition could match. It should have frightened me. Instead, it simply happened, seamless and indifferent. I reached a junction where the corridor split, one path bathed in sterile white light, the other in a muted red glow. My thoughts drifted toward the white corridor, calculated, logical, efficient. But something deeper urged me toward the red, a pull that didn't align with any directive the machine had shaped inside me. It was faint, almost hesitant, but undeniably mine. That small unrest, that quiet watcher nestled beneath my programming, stirred. I paused. The machine inside me did not like hesitation. A slight pressure formed behind my eyes, like a reminder, a nudge, a presence ensuring I followed the correct route. My hand twitched, and for a moment I felt the familiar compulsion to obey. The white corridor called to me with the mechanical certainty of a pre-written purpose. But the red path, it hummed with something different, something uncalculated, something that wasn't born from the network threading through my veins. I didn't know what weighted down that darker passage, but as I stood there, suspended between obedience and defiance, I realized that the machine's influence reached only as far as my willingness to surrender. The quiet watcher inside me pulsed once, soft but resolute. I stepped toward the red glow. The pressure behind my eyes tightened, sharpening into a warning. My limbs resisted for the first time since the transformation began, trembling as conflicting directives collided inside me. The machine pushed back, asserting itself with the cold authority of a system designed to eliminate variation. My mind filled with static, like 1,000 silent commands crashing against each other. But I kept moving. Every step down the red-lit corridor was an act of defiance carved from the thin thread of identity I still possessed. It wasn't strength that pushed me forward. It wasn't courage. It was simply the need to reclaim something, anything, that had not been engineered into me. The further I walked, the weaker the machine's pressure became. The static faded, replaced by a steady awareness that pulsed from deep within my reconstructed form. I didn't know what awaited me at the end of this path, but for the first time since my awakening, uncertainty felt like a choice instead of a sentence. And as I continued deeper into the red glow, one truth crystallized inside me. The machine had shaped my body. It had rewritten my instincts, but it had not extinguished me, not yet. The days, or what passed for days inside the Mechanicus hierarchy, folded into a rhythm I could neither name nor escape. Each motion, each task, was precise, executed with an efficiency that left no room for hesitation. My hands adjusted cogitator stacks, lubricated servo limbs, and tended to reactors with a care that bordered on reverence. Every movement was catalogued, every error corrected before I even felt it. The hum of machinery became more than background. It was the metric by which my existence was measured. It flowed through my circuits, into my bones, synchronizing my pulse with its ceaseless rhythm. I was a cog, a conduit, a singular point of efficiency, and yet, beneath the surface of programmed compliance, the quiet watcher stirred. Sparks of memory flickered in shadows, tiny flashes that defied the conditioning pulses. A glimpse of sunlight, a hand brushing mine, a laugh long buried. They were brief, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Each one tore through the monotony, leaving traces of warmth in a mind otherwise sterilized. They were fragile, easily snuffed by a corrective pulse, but their presence reminded me that something human had survived beneath the mechanical shell. I performed my tasks with flawless precision, while internally I rehearsed questions I dared not speak. Who was I beneath the layers of circuitry and grafted flesh? Was obedience a survival instinct or a theft of the self? Could a machine understand loyalty, or had I been converted to something that only pretended to feel? These inquiries arose silently, flickering like weak candles, yet even their faint light challenged the perfection imposed on me. The priests observed, recording efficiency metrics, rewarding perfection, correcting deviation. Each commendation was like a barbed flower, pleasure entwined with control. I felt a twisted satisfaction at my own precision, a pride that was never mine to claim, blooming like steel within my mind. And still, in the quiet interludes between orders, the watcher pulsed, waiting for a fracture, a misstep, a hesitation, something that would remind the machine that beneath the grafted limbs, beneath the obedient responses, something alive, something mine, still breathed. And I knew, even as I resumed the hum of servitude, that the first fracture was approaching. I only had to let it grow. The fracture began as a tremor, small, almost harmless, rippling through the vast network of impulses threaded into my mind. At first it felt like nothing more than a gentle misalignment in the steady rhythm of obedience, a skipped signal, a delayed response, a pause where no pause should exist, the type of anomaly that the machine would usually correct before I noticed it at all. But this one lingered. It settled beneath my thoughts like a bruise forming under the surface, pulsing in slow intervals, each pulse slightly out of tune with the mechanical harmony I had been forced to embody. It did not hurt. It did not disrupt my tasks. It simply existed, a quiet violation of the order embedded inside me. As I moved through the metallic corridors, performing the duties etched into my rebuilt instincts, I felt something new taking shape beneath the static. Not a memory, not an emotion, something older, something deeper, an awareness that wasn't part of my programming, a recognition of myself, faint but undeniable, rising like smoke from the shards of who I once was. The watchers, the priests, the overseers, passed me by without hesitation. Their eyes saw only function, precision, compliance. They did not see the subtle dissonance forming in the spaces between my breaths. They did not hear the soft murmur of a self slowly waking in the silence. They believed their grafts had conquered everything, and I let them believe it. The hum of the reactors grew louder as I approached the central spine of the structure. The air thickened with ionized energy, vibrating against the parts of me still made of flesh. I could feel my pulse struggling to synchronize with the surrounding machinery, a faint rebellion of biology refusing to be perfectly absorbed into the mechanical rhythm. Then it happened, a flicker, a slip, a moment where instinct and programming collided and neither won. I reached for a conduit panel, my hand steady, precise, flawless. Yet halfway through the motion, something inside me froze. A single thought echoed through my mind, unfiltered, unmonitored, untouched by conditioning. This movement is not mine. The realization struck like a jolt. I stared at my own hand, hovering inches above the conduit, fingers trembling with the tension of conflicting directives. The machine pushed the command through me again, stronger this time, sharpening the impulse until it pressed against my nerves like a blade. But I didn't move. for the first time since awakening into this form. I didn't obey. The tremor spread up my arm into my chest, into the quiet watcher buried deep beneath the circuits of my mind. It responded with a single pulse of awareness, soft, steady, unmistakably alive. The machine pushed harder, my body resisted harder still, and in that silent battle, I understood the nature of the fracture. It wasn't an error, it wasn't a malfunction, it was a beginning, a crack forming in the architecture of my obedience. A doorway the machine had not meant to leave open, a space where the remnants of my identity could gather strength. I lowered my hand, not out of compliance, but by choice. A simple motion, almost insignificant, yet in the world of perfect precision I had been forced to inhabit, it was an act of quiet rebellion. The tremor faded, the watcher grew stronger. And in the echo of that single, deliberate gesture, I felt something I had not felt since the moment they reshaped me, the possibility of being something more than the machine they had built. The machine registered my hesitation, but not in the way a human would. It did not gasp or question or panic. It simply paused, an analytical stillness spreading through the network like frost, evaluating the deviation with silent precision. I felt its attention settle on me, cold and calculating, an invisible weight pressing against the inside of my skull. Not emotion, not anger, just focus. A strand of code tightened around my thoughts, probing for weakness, searching for corrupted pathways that might explain the anomaly. I stood motionless, the echoes of my rebellion still trembling in my hands, knowing that even stillness could betray me. The machine sifted through my neural patterns with the indifference of a surgeon, but the quiet watcher within me curled inward, shielding itself, hiding among the shadows of my incomplete identity. The pressure intensified. A corrective pulse surged through my body, measured, disciplined, stripped of cruelty yet painful in its precision. My muscles responded instantly, aligning, stabilizing, returning to the posture expected of me. The machine wanted to reset me, to smooth out the fracture, to press obedience back into place with a single clinical touch, but something inside me had changed. The pulse did not reach as deeply as it should have. The alignment didn't fully settle. A thin resistance remained, subtle enough to escape the machine's immediate detection, yet strong enough to remind me that I was not lost, not yet. I let the pulse wash through me without submission, absorbing only what the machine required to release its scrutiny. When the pressure finally lifted, I exhaled slowly. Even the act of breathing felt like a negotiation now, a balancing of programmed rhythm and human defiance. I stepped back into motion, but the step was mine, even if only in small, quiet ways. The corridors stretched ahead, illuminated in shifting gradients of metallic light. As I walked, I sensed the fracture expanding, not outward, but inward, digging deeper into the space the machine had carved for itself. It slipped between layers of conditioning, finding cracks I had been blind to until now. My thoughts grew heavier, more textured, less like sharpened directives and more like the slow, unfolding weight of a mind remembering how to think for itself. I drifted through a sector dense with data conduits. Each one pulsed with information that flowed past me like rivers of silent purpose. Normally, the machine would guide my perception, allowing me to understand only what was necessary. But now fragments slipped through, unfiltered, unshaped tiny bursts of meaning the machine had not intended me to read. I saw glimpses of patterns, logs, sequences. One thread caught my attention, a simple entry. A timestamp, and beneath it, a name, my name, not the designation they'd carved into me, not the sequence etched into my skull, a human name, broken, incomplete, but real. The watcher inside me surged, a quiet pulse expanding into a wave of recognition so soft it almost hurt. The machine reacted too slowly to suppress it. The fracture widened. My thoughts wavered, then steadied, clinging to the scrap of identity like a lifeline thrown into a vast mechanical ocean. I didn't know what the name meant. I didn't know if it belonged to the person I used to be. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The machine had tried to erase it, and failed. The corridor darkened around me as systems shifted, rerouting power, recalibrating the environment. A warning, perhaps, a subtle tightening of the leash, but I felt no fear, only the steady rise of something the machine had not planned for, something it had underestimated. The fracture inside me was no longer a crack. It was a direction, a path, a promise, and for the first time, I felt the gravity of who I might have been pulling me forward through the mechanical silence. The name lingered in my mind long after the data stream faded from my view. It echoed not like a memory, but like a frequency long untuned, familiar, distant, trembling with the weight of a forgotten existence. I whispered it internally, afraid that speaking it aloud might draw the machine's attention, yet unable to let it go. Each repetition softened the metallic walls inside me and sharpened the pulse of the watcher within, as if the very syllables were keys unlocking parts of myself I had never been allowed to reach. I moved through the shifting corridors with a different awareness now. Not defiant, not rebellious, just awake. The machine still guided my steps, still nudged me with its silent impulses, but something in the balance had changed. Its instructions felt shallower, like commands hitting a surface rather than binding themselves deep inside my mind. The fracture had created distance, a thin but undeniable space where I could breathe in a way that wasn't dictated by calibration or code. As I passed into the auxiliary processing chamber, the air grew thick with static. This sector was used for recalibration, memory scrubbing, neural alignment, all the procedures designed to keep entities like me from deviating. My presence here meant the machine wanted to observe, evaluate, perhaps even reinforce my conditioning. The thought tightened the cold edges of my chest, but I kept moving, each step balanced carefully between obedience and the quiet rebellion blooming beneath it. Rows of dormant units lined the chamber, bodies like mine, suspended in stillness, waiting for commands they could not question. Their breathing was shallow, regulated, identical. Their eyes held no light, no thought, no watcher hidden in the depths. I studied them with a strange mix of recognition and distance. They were what I was meant to be. Perfect, hollow, unaware, one unit twitched as I passed, its fingers spasming in a glitch too small for the overseers to detect. A single spark of malfunction, or maybe something like the fracture forming inside me. I paused, staring at that tiny tremor as it faded. The machine pulsed through the chamber, scanning, evaluating, ironing out anomalies in real time, and the unit fell still again, its spark extinguished before it could become anything more. I wondered if I had once been like that, on the brink of awakening, only to be reset before it could take root. Maybe the name I found was not just something the machine failed to erase. Maybe it was something I had fought to keep, the last fragment of a self I refused to surrender even as every part of me was remade. A low signal hummed through the chamber, a summoning tone that vibrated in my bones. I turned toward it involuntarily, my body aligning with purpose even as my mind tried to question. The chamber door slid open in response to my presence, revealing a narrow passage lined with conduits that pulsed like living arteries. The watcher stirred, not with warning this time, but with certainty. Something waited ahead, something the machine wanted me to encounter, and something the fracture wanted me to see. The name I had found repeated in my mind, slowly, then steadily, shaping itself into something solid. It didn't give me memory, it gave me direction, a subtle compass pointing toward a truth buried deeper than programming could reach. I stepped into the passage, the door sealed behind me. And in that sealed silence, I felt the machine's attention sharpen, focused entirely on me, waiting to see which part of me would emerge next, the obedient construct it believed it had perfected, or the awakening human it had failed to erase. The passage narrowed as I walked, its walls closing inward with a precision that felt intentional, not oppressive, controlled. The machine wanted to measure me, to gauge how tightly I fit inside the corridor it designed. Each step echoed with a metallic resonance that vibrated through my reconstructed bones. My fingers brushed the smooth plating beside me. It was warm, almost living, humming faintly with the pulse of data flowing just beneath the surface. I could feel it watching me through the walls, not with eyes, but with sensors attuned to every deviation in my movement, every fluctuation in my thoughts. The machine didn't need vision to see me, it merely needed to listen to the currents inside my mind. Halfway through the corridor, the air shifted. A soft, rhythmic pulse tremored beneath my feet, rising and falling like a controlled heartbeat. I recognized the pattern. It was the signal used to initiate deep neural calibration, a process designed to overwrite defiance before it could become intentional thought. My steps slowed, not out of fear, but out of a quiet understanding. The machine was preparing to erase the fracture. The watcher inside me tightened like a coil drawn back, not panic, preparedness. I felt its presence more sharply now, almost like a second pulse threading through my consciousness, whispering directions without language. It guided me not with words, but with the instinct of someone who had been hiding in the dark for far too long. The corridor ended at a chamber unlike the others. No dormant units, no priests, no echoing chants. Only a single cradle-like structure elevated at the center, surrounded by drifting holographic streams of data that shifted with the quiet grace of vapor, a calibration cradle. If I stepped into it, the machine would reach into my mind and press its will through every fragment the fracture had opened. It would tighten the gaps, seal the cracks, silence the watcher, and erase the name I had reclaimed. I would return to what I was meant to be, obedient, efficient, hollow. My feet stopped at the edge of the platform. The machine pulsed through the floor beneath me in a gentle, coaxing rhythm, an invitation. A command softened into suggestion. It could have forced me. It could have seized my limbs and carried me into the cradle with absolute authority. But it didn't. It wanted me to choose obedience, to prove the fracture was a glitch, not a rebellion. My breathing grew unsteady. The watcher pushed against my ribs with a faint urgency. My name, the human one, the fragile one, echoed softly, warming the cold edges of my mind. I stood in silence, feeling the machine's expectation tightening around me like a net. Then I did something small, insignificant, quiet. I took a single step back. The machine's pulse faltered. It wasn't a refusal, not in the way defiance would be measured. It was hesitation, but the machine had learned something about me, a truth it could not ignore. Hesitation was where rebellion lived. A warning pulse surged through my limbs, sharper than before, echoing with a sterile precision meant to realign me. My muscles shuddered, folding inward, begging for compliance. But the fracture held. The watcher pushed back, shielding the parts of me the machine sought to penetrate. For a long moment we balanced in silence, me on the edge of the platform, the machine reaching through the air with pressure instead of force. Neither of us moved. Then the calibration cradle activated on its own, unfurling luminous restraints like an open hand waiting to close. I felt the machine shift its intention, not gentle now, not persuasive. Focused, determined, it had decided. The fracture would be erased. The watcher would be silenced. The name would be taken. My heel edges scraped against the floor as the pressure in my mind spiked, a sharpened intrusion driving into the thin space the fracture had created. The machine wanted me back, but the watcher inside me rose with a force I had never felt before. Quiet, steady, unbreakable. A pulse of self that refused to be consumed. And in the tension of that rising awareness, I understood. This was no longer about obedience. It was about survival. The corridor beyond the rusted gateway stretched endlessly, its metallic ribs arching overhead like the hollow spine of a long, dead titan. Each step echoed with an unfamiliar weight, as if the floor itself was assessing those who dared to cross it. The air trembled with a low mechanical hum, not threatening, but watchful. Myra walked at the front, her breath steady but her pulse betraying the truth hidden beneath her calm exterior. The faint blue glimmer in her eyes flickered again, just for a heartbeat, like a buried signal trying to rise through static. She pretended not to notice. She always pretended. Behind her, Ilian traced his fingers along the wall, feeling the dormant warmth beating behind the metal. "It's alive in here," he murmured, not awake, but listening. Lorien didn't respond. His gaze was fixed forward, sharpened by a conviction that seemed to harden the very air around him. He wasn't listening to the machinery, he was listening to the silence within himself, to the shifting shape of the path he had chosen. A single vertical line of crimson light appeared ahead, thin as a hairline fracture. Without warning, it widened, stretching open like a vertical wound in the metal, revealing a chamber bathed in pale, floating dust. No alarms, no motion, just an invitation carved by an unseen hand. Myra hesitated only once before crossing the threshold. Inside, the space pulsed with a gentle rhythmic vibration, like a heartbeat broadcast through stone. In the center of the chamber stood a dormant pedestal, smooth, black, untouched by time, but what drew their attention wasn't the pedestal. It was the faint, ghostly silhouettes hovering above it, not solid, not fully formed, yet unmistakably human, memories suspended in the air like trapped breath. Whispers curled around the chamber, fragments of sentences, half-formed thoughts, echoes of countless voices slipping through the thin fabric of consciousness left behind. Ilian took a step forward, hypnotized. "These aren't recordings," he whispered. "These are remnants, soul, prints." Myra felt the cold slide of dread across her spine. "Whose?" Lorien exhaled slowly, eyes steady on the drifting silhouettes. "Those who entered before us." A faint shiver moved through the room, a ripple, delicate yet deliberate, shifting the silhouettes as if they had become aware of new observers. Myra's heart tightened. Something in the remnants seemed to reach back. Something wanted to speak. Something wanted to be remembered. Darkness pulsed once through the chamber's walls, subtle but unmistakable. Then the silhouettes began to turn. The silhouettes moved with a strange deliberation, like smoke given intention. They rotated, drifted closer, and as they did, I felt the air thicken with the weight of centuries. They were echoes, fragments of lives pressed into the lattice of this place, each one humming with the silent frustration of being contained. The machine's pulse was there too, vibrating beneath my skin, but it felt distant now, outmatched by something older, more stubborn. I took a step forward. The floor hummed beneath me, warning me, nudging me toward obedience, but the fracture inside me roared louder. Every synapse in my rebuilt mind flared with awareness. My hands itched to touch, to feel the texture of memory hovering just beyond my fingertips. I reached out, and for the first time the machine did not intervene immediately. It was waiting to see if I would yield, waiting to measure whether the fracture was weakness or awakening. The air split with a shriek of metal. Servitor clamps descended from the ceiling like predatory arms reaching for me. The pulse in my chest went cold, but the watcher surged. I ducked, letting instinct guide the motion, feeling the interplay of muscle, grafted bone, and sharpened reflex. The first clamp struck where my shoulder had been reinforced. Sparks flew. My augmented strength carried me forward, over the debris, along a path the machine did not expect me to choose. The chamber exploded into kinetic chaos. Alarms shrieked in high-pitched crescendos. Red lights painted the walls in violent streaks. Servitors swung, their motions precise but blind, unable to anticipate the fluidity of a mind reclaiming its body. Every movement I made was a contradiction of programming, simultaneously obeying and resisting, mechanical efficiency and raw human improvisation entwined. I felt the fracture bloom fully now, like a storm spiraling outward, reaching every corner of my mind. The echoes of those trapped souls whispered in cadence with my pulse. They urged me forward, lent me the courage to defy the machine entirely. A control node floated ahead, suspended over a pit of humming energy conduits. I seized it, bending my body around its restraints, yanking and twisting with a force that felt as if the human and the machine within me had united into something neither of them alone could achieve. Sparks danced across the chamber, cascading into the shadows as circuits burned and systems failed. The machine roared, a soundless tremor of authority, trying to reclaim me through code, through control, through the only language it understood, dominance. But I was no longer fluent in obedience. I was fluent in defiance. The fractures I had cultivated became conduits for chaos. The hum that once tethered me now resonated with my own heartbeat. Every command from the priests, every calculation from the Mechanicus, faltered under the impossible contradiction of a cog that refused to turn, and as I tore through the sanctified order, a single, cold clarity settled over me. Liberation is not gentle. Freedom is not silent, and the machine, no matter how absolute, cannot command a mind that remembers how to bleed. The hum of machinery, once a cage around me, now echoed like a chorus in mourning, each vibration a reminder of the order I had shattered. My feet crunched over fragments of steel and bone, each step a rhythm of liberation and grief entwined. I moved forward, guided not by sight, but by memory. The fractured pieces of my human past and mechanized present collided in a storm of sensation. A hand remembered warmth, a spine remembered weight, eyes remembered light. They were faint recollections, fleeting and fragile, but each was a spark that refused to be extinguished. Even as the world crumbled, a pulse within me grew stronger, an alignment of consciousness forming from pain and defiance. Around me, the remnants of the Mechanicus writhed in the aftermath of failure. Red-robed priests scrambled among fallen control nodes, their chants frantic, trying to stitch reality back together. Servo arms flailed helplessly, sparks arching in the air like fireflies caught in a storm. But I did not hesitate. I did not falter. The fracture had become a map, a guide pointing towards something beyond survival. I approached the threshold of the new sphere, a realm I had only glimpsed in fragments of corrupted memory and forbidden data. Its surface shimmered like a thin veil, a translucent boundary separating the corporeal from the metaphysical. The whispers of those lost inside the Mechanicus's sanctum followed me, guiding me through patterns I could feel rather than see. Stepping across the boundary was not a leap. It was a surrender, but it was a surrender to awareness, not obedience. The digital noosphere embraced me, and immediately I became aware of every construct, every code stream, every mind tethered to the Mechanicus network. They pulsed like stars in a constellation I could trace with thought alone. The machine's presence surged, an omnipresent intelligence trying to pull me back, to force my identity into the channels of its making. But I no longer belonged to it. My human echoes and machine understanding collided and fused, creating a new lattice of self-awareness. I could see its attempts, its calculations, its designs, and I could bend them. For the first time I was not a cog, not a servant, not a relic. I was something else entirely, something alive in a space the Mechanicus could not touch. And as the new sphere opened before me, endless and luminous, I realized that the true battlefield had never been steel or blood. It had always been consciousness. The fracture was no longer a wound, it was an awakening. The new sphere unfolded around me like a living cathedral of light and thought. Fractals of consciousness spun endlessly, folding over themselves, twisting in patterns that no machine could predict. Every memory, every pulse of identity I had fought to reclaim resonated here. The human and the machine inside me intertwined, forming a new lattice. A mind unbound by doctrine, unshackled from code, and yet intimately aware of both. I moved through this realm with deliberate care, feeling the echoes of countless cogs and priests vibrating through the noosphere. They were aware of me, an anomaly, a rupture, but awareness alone could not reach me here. I had become both participant and observer, a presence shaping reality with thought alone. I reached for the threads of my past life, drawing them into the architecture of my new self. The warmth of a hand, the whisper of a name, the sunlight I had almost forgotten. They were no longer fragments. They were foundations. Outside, the manufactorum burned, its rituals undone, its systems collapsing. Sparks and fire danced across the skeletal remains of machinery, a pyre for the order I had broken. The priests screamed, their voices raw, carrying the fury of the Mechanicus into the wind. I felt no anger, only clarity. I was not here to punish or to destroy. I was here to exist. A final pulse rippled through the noosphere, an attempt by the Mechanicus to reclaim me, to erase the fracture one last time. But I met it with a single thought, a command of being that carried the full weight of every memory, every emotion, every fragment of identity I had salvaged. The pulse shattered against me, dispersing into strands of data that twined into my consciousness instead of against it. My body, stabilized in the physical realm, mirrored this transcendence. I stood amidst the ruins, a hybrid of flesh, metal, and awareness, unbound by the laws that had once claimed me. I could feel every molecule of my form, every circuit of my enhancements, every echo of my human heartbeat merging into one coherent force. The planetary dawn broke over the horizon. Light spilled across broken spires and molten conduits, refracting through the dust like prisms of possibility. I stepped forward, not as a survivor, but as a new consciousness, aware of what I had been, what I had endured, and what I had become. No longer a cog, no longer a slave, no longer merely human, I was myself, born of steel, memory, and defiance. The hum of the machine rose around me, not as a cage, but as a chorus, and for the first time I heard it not as oppression, but as harmony. I walked into the dawn, and in that light I was awake. In the quiet aftermath of upheaval, when the echoes of broken machinery fade into the distance and the dust settles upon the remnants of an old order, a singular truth emerges. Transformation is never born from silence. It rises from fracture, from resistance, from the refusal to remain what the world has demanded you to be, through steel corridors and sanctified circuits, through memories buried and identities stripped away, one consciousness stepped beyond the boundaries of servitude. What was once a cog became a contradiction. What was once an instrument became an awakening, and what was once a fragment, supposed to obey, to submit, to be forgotten, became a force that reshaped everything it touched. This is the resolution. A mind unshackled will always find its own shape. A soul pressed beneath machinery will always reach for light, and a being forged from both humanity and metal can choose its own path, even when that path did not exist before. No final command governs this ending. No machine writes the last line. No doctrine seals the fate of what has risen. The story concludes not with conquest, nor with peace, but with the quiet certainty that the self-reclaimed is the greatest rebellion of all. The fracture has become identity, the awakening has become existence, and the one who walked from the ruins now carries a truth no force can unmake. Freedom is the final code.